Hi there, and welcome to the podcast. I'm your host, Rosa Coelho, health coach, trainer, and teacher. I'm also founder of the Simply Strong programs and community. Here, we cut through the noise to simplify health, personal growth, and lifestyle, helping you to thrive with ease, confidence, and vitality. Listen in because you never know when you may hear something that changes everything. Hello, beautiful friend, and welcome to another episode. I'm so happy to have you here. Okay, today we are talking all about when macros aren't working for you. You're like, but I've been doing this and I'm not seeing any shifts on the scale and I really want to. Okay, I always have to preface this with letting you know that I am not just about fat loss. I am about building strength, about learning new skills, about learning how to nourish our bodies, how to eat for energy and vitality. But I do recognize that also being a healthy weight is an important part of being healthy. And so there's times where, yes, the weight loss is important as well. And we all have that kind of place that we just feel so good in. So there's also no shame. I think for a long time, we also shame women around wanting to lose weight. It's okay to want to feel your best. I do think also that we're not after necessarily the weight loss. We're after that feeling that we believe the weight loss is going to bring us. And it can, if we do things in a way that is health centered and not deprivation centered. But here's the thing. One thing remains true no matter what, no matter how much I fought this in my 30s when I first became a trainer and thought calories don't matter. They really don't, but it is actually just true. You have to be in a calorie deficit in order to lose weight, period. And so what happens if you're tracking and you're like, okay, I put most of my ladies at a 15%, sometimes a 20% deficit, and the 20% is actually lower than I like, but I do often will do a 20%, especially at the beginning, mostly because of the reasons I'm going to talk about. It's just like when you're learning, you're not necessarily super accurate. But I think a 15% deficit is a really great place for most women to lose it and still feel like they're well nourished and they've got energy and health. So here's an interesting fact if you didn't know this already. To lose a pound of body fat a week, you need to be in a deficit of 3,500 calories in that week. So we're talking about 500 calories a day. So if you normally eat 2,500 or 2,000, then you want to be bringing that back by 500 so that you can lose that steady pound a week. And the truth is the same for putting on. That if you're putting on a pound a week, chances are that you're going over by about 3,500. Now, we're all slightly different, so that number is really just for the average person, but you'll get the concept of this, and this is what's really important. So if you're like, oh, I am not losing anything, like the range, I always use a range with my ladies. So for example, because we retain if we've had something with too much sodium in it, or we haven't slept well, or we've been having a bit more carbs than usual, and carbs can really hold on to water. So we might just have more water weight. We'll have this range of like 3 to 4 pounds that we fluctuate through, if your cycle's coming on and so on. And so I just like to see that range coming down. So if that range isn't coming down from one week to the next, then it's time to look at the tracking and like what is going on. So here's a few things that I have just come across over time that really, when you focus on these things, you'll get back on track. So one is measuring over weighing. This used to be me for sure. Like when I started tracking macros, is I would measure things. So for example, protein powder, I would measure a scoop of it as opposed to weighing it. But when you're in a hurry, a scoop isn't just a scoop. I'm either undercutting it or I'm overcutting it. Like to get it perfectly at like the 30 grams is, I wouldn't say it's difficult, but it takes like a very conscious effort. But then again, you don't know unless you're weighing it. So I've started weighing everything, including my cream. Like I used to just like free pour cream into my coffee. And it was like when I actually started to become aware of that and started to weigh it, I was like, wow, like there's a lot more calories very easily that creep into my day and into my week by free pouring as opposed to actually weighing it. So now I've started weighing. The other thing is not counting the fats that we use when we're cooking. So like if I'm cooking my eggs in the morning and I use some olive oil or I use some butter and then not putting that in, but putting in the eggs. So hidden fats is a very easy one to do. Or like licking that almond butter spoon, like you can easily have 50 calories in just like that lick of a spoon. The other one is not tracking whole meals. So for example, maybe you're really great at tracking breakfast and lunch, but not great at tracking dinner, or you're great at tracking dinner, but not great at tracking breakfast. So within the week, you're going to miss out on that particular meal a few times. Well, again, that's without the data, you don't know, but that's where those like extra calories can be. So you have to be super consistent. And then the other one is not tracking like the things that we drink, like popping through a Starbucks and having a latte. That could be an extra, depending on the size, what you add to it, that could be an extra 300 to 500 calories just in a drink. And I find drinking our calories tends to be like the number one thing that will often like jeopardize people because we don't think of it, or we put it in as a coffee as opposed to like a latte. So being really specific about what you're having. Now, in talking about this, my worry, my concern is always that people become super obsessive. Like we're talking tracking these calories at a deficit for a specific goal. Eventually, like as you lose the body fat, because we can't always be in a state of losing body fat. Like we disappear, we would be miserable. Like that's not the point. Like you want to do this for a 4 to 6 week period. And then you want to actually start to increase the calories. And you do that by also introducing more strength training, and not because we're making up for the extra calories in strength training. It's that we need more calories to sustain our training for our muscle mass to put on lean muscle, and that putting on weight isn't necessarily a bad thing. We want to be putting on muscle weight. And for that, you do need the extra calories. If you weigh more, you're going to need more. But again, you can't always be like just wanting to lose the weight. It's just when we talk about losing weight, hopefully what we're talking about is losing excess body fat. And losing that body fat that isn't great for our internal organs, isn't great when we have it in excess, as opposed to then switching and being like, okay, actually now I'd like to put on some muscle mass and I need to start eating some more. And so that's a really important thing to take from here, is that you can't always be losing weight. Like if I find that women get into this cycle, lose those 10 pounds, put the 10 pounds back on, lose the 10 pounds, and it becomes like this never ending cycle, as opposed to, why don't we have a pattern interrupt? Why don't we go, okay, lose those 10 pounds of body fat, put on a few pounds of muscle mass, which I'll have to tell you takes months. It takes a long time to put on muscle. So if you're like, oh my goodness, like I don't want to put that on, I'm going to bulk up, no, it doesn't quite work that way. But what a great reframe. What a great other thing to be working on as opposed to the body fat. So I did want to touch on that because I feel like by listing these things that it's so easy for someone to become obsessive with calories, and where you do need to be in a deficit to achieve your goal. We also want to protect our mindset around all of this. Like I just like to gamify it really, and I just think of it like, okay, I'm in a bit of a cut right now. Like I want to lean down. This is where I'm at. And then next, I know that I'm going to be working on my strength, and just looking at the year as seasons, as opposed to always be in this like calorie deficit and having to be so accurate. Like it's okay to take time off of weighing everything too. The point of weighing our food, the point of like macros that really has like been so enlightening for me has been to learn about my food. Like I think that's the biggest thing today, as opposed to when I first started as a trainer back in 2006, where we didn't have these apps. We weren't weighing our protein. It's like my clients would just keep a food diary and they'd be like, oh, I had this or I had that. And we looked more like at the ingredients and clean ingredients, but a lot of them still weren't losing weight because we didn't have this like I didn't know like how much fat is in salmon or how much protein is in chicken. And both of those things are good. Like the fats in salmon is good and the protein is good. And it's just a matter of like, when are you having it in your day and is it fitting your macros? And until you learn the value of these foods, like what they represent, then you don't know. It's like a currency. If you don't know the value of a quarter or a value of a loonie, you don't know it. Like how do you budget if you don't understand it? And so it's the same thing. It's just learning to understand our foods and then making those choices. This week, I've had a few ladies track treats that they had, and these treats took them like way over their calorie count and they weren't ashamed of it. And I was like, yes, like when I see them track that, I get so happy because here's the thing. If you don't learn how to, and I don't like calling it cheats. I'm just calling it that because it's like what people understand. It's just food and chilling out. But when you have these things that are very calorie dense, let's call them calorie dense foods that you don't normally have and you track them, well, then that's amazing because you'll know, oh my gosh, like I have been having, for the last 6 months before my tracking journey, I was having that like 3 or 4 times a week. Like no wonder, 6 months later, I've actually put on like 5, 10, 15 pounds. Like, how did that happen? Well, that's how it happened. And so to know that, you're like, oh, okay, that's how it happened. And that's how I want women to look at it. It's like, okay, I get it. So now what am I going to do about it? And does it mean I have to cut those things out all the time? No. Does it mean I have to have them like way less? Absolutely. Like, look, at the end of the day, like if we want to get to a certain goal, we have to change what we're doing. But it's really, if the ladies doing Simply Strong can do this 6-week program and they can have these like so-called treats a few times within the program and feel good and feel like this is like lifestyle and sustainable, and they can go on a holiday for a week and not feel derailed and not feel like they're, starting all over or feel like they can't even start because they're going away. That whole thing, like that's just not real life. And so I love it when they track that because so often we also just lie to ourselves. So we're like, oh, I had this. I can't track it. I don't want to look at the numbers. I don't want to know. If I don't track it, I'll start tracking again tomorrow. Okay, great. So it doesn't change the fact that we've had it. And if anything, like those little lies that we do to ourselves, like those little promises that we break, that's what starts to like eat away at our self-confidence. That's what starts to like make us want to quit. That's what brings in these guilt cycles, the like not feeling like proud of yourself. Like, no, like I really believe there's something so powerful when you're like, oh, I had that, tracked it. Yep, I was over. And guess what? The next day, I'm not punishing myself. I'm just going to get back to my normal plan because that's what we need. And then when you look at the course of a week or 2 weeks or 6 weeks and you're like, wow, I only did that like a couple of times. And that is like the power of longevity, of doing these things long term, as opposed to just like lose these 10 pounds and then I'm totally done. Okay. So a couple of things, if you are tracking and you're like, oh man, I'm tracking, but I'm like still like I have these cravings or I'm not feeling great. Here's a few things that will also help. One is, yes, it is about being in a calorie deficit 100%. And people always talk about hormones. Look, you can lose weight even going through perimenopause and menopause. It's not necessarily the hormones that are making you put on the weight. It's what the hormones, how they can make you feel. So for example, if you're not sleeping well, it's going to affect your leptin and ghrelin hormones. So these are your hunger hormones. These are the hormones. Leptin tells you when you're full. Ghrelin tells you if you're hungry. If you haven't slept well, that's when you're going to be messed up and you're going to have cravings and feel either you're going to feel starving or you're not going to feel hungry. It kind of impacts us all a little bit differently. But if we're going through perimenopause and we're not sleeping well, the hormones can impact our sleep, then there's things that we need to do. We need to focus on the sleep. So I love the idea of taking magnesium, of getting off the phone at night, of like really creating like this nighttime ritual so that you can start to sleep better, because that's going to impact those hormones that impact how you feel in terms of cravings, which will then make the food choices easier and tracking fun, because when you're not having those cravings, it is like anything. It is easier to track when we feel like we're making great choices. So that's how it really starts to impact us. The other thing is eating your proteins first, reaching that protein goal first before anything else. And then making sure that you have those healthy fats and carbohydrates in there. The fats and the proteins are going to make you feel satiated. And they're going to help again with those cravings. So I always say protein first, protein first, protein first. And I know it feels like everyone out there is like, protein. It's like, why are we eating excessive amounts of protein now? Like, what is going on? Like, we're not actually eating excessive amounts of protein. What happened was like, protein's been demonized for so long. Red meat's been demonized for so long. Women are like, oh, I'm so anemic. Well, let's start to eat some red meat. Like, let's start to bring back these natural foods back into our diet. I actually brought milk back into my diet and I am feeling incredible. I'm like, what point did I listen to marketing that milk isn't good for us? Yes, quality does matter. So I do buy grass-fed milk, organic, and just do my best. But there are so many like amazing nutrients in milk that help with muscles and with hormones and with everything. Like, I just feel so good on it now. And the reason I started having it is because I started making these Ninja creamy ice creams, but that's a story for another day. But anyway, so focus on your proteins first, because again, that's just going to help you to feel better and to make better choices when we're not fighting these cravings or we're not fighting the feeling of being hungry. Now, the feeling of being hungry, it's okay to be hungry before your next meal. Like when it's time for breakfast or when it's time for lunch or you're close to dinner time, those are normal times to start to feel some hunger. If you're getting to really late at night and you're hungry, well, chances are you didn't have enough in the day. And so you need to look back and think, okay, where did I not eat enough? And so it's also really important, because one thing I don't want my ladies doing is undercutting the undercut that they're already on. Like, they're already in a deficit. And so when I see that they're underneath that deficit and they're not reaching their calories, then I pipe in as well, because like, you need to be nourishing your body. It's very important that you're not, again, becoming obsessive or trying to like do things too fast. Time goes no matter what. So why does it matter if you lost those 5 pounds over 6 weeks or if you lost them in 1 week? I mean, it matters because it's sustainable, but it's just that my point is that the time is going to pass. Like, you will reach your goal. So we also need to take a deep breath and not need everything to happen like right now. Okay, my friend, that's all I've got for you today. If you enjoyed this episode, if you got anything out of it, please, please, please share it on Instagram, especially Facebook too. Tag me in it. If you could leave a review on iTunes, that's amazing. I know that's a little bit of a bigger ask. It's a bit of a pain, but if you've been listening for some time, leaving those reviews really makes a difference to getting this podcast out there. Okay, thanks so much and have a beautiful one. Thank you so much for listening in today. I know time is precious and I'm grateful you shared yours with me. It would mean the world to me if you felt an impact, a moment of inspiration, or learned something new. If you would share it with those you care about and leave me a review on iTunes. I'd love to know what spoke to you or what you'd like to hear more of. Your sharing and leaving a review would help so much on this journey to making an impact on as many people as possible. It's worth it. I know from experience, there are moments when something we hear has the possibility of changing everything.